Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about World War One, otherwise known as the Great War or the War to End All Wars. World War One was between 1914 and 1918, and it was started mainly because of a variety of conditions that have existed in the world post-industrial revolution. And this is considered the industrial revolution's first, war where technology has really advanced. Number one, militarism. This is when a country not only puts more land, labor, and capital into producing its military, but is actually really into using its military. I am now powerful. I am technologically now more sound. So let's use this to acquire more land, labor, and capital at a greater margin. Alliances, agreements between countries stating that that each country will assist the other if attacked. Around the world, as we're noticing that countries are getting gobbled up through imperialism, countries come together and start to form alliances. Let's build friendships. Collectively, we are stronger than if we're standing alone. Nationalism, extreme pride in one's country. The Catholic Church is really not an influence anymore. And race, ethnicity, tribes in Europe, that's not really what's getting people's passions. Instead, people are really into not being part of a German tribe, but being part of Germany, or not being part of like an Austrian Hungarian tribe, but Austria Hungary or France or England. They are really into being themselves. And of course, because they're taking over other countries, that drives the pride even more. So people are really ramping up not only that their country is the best, but that everybody else is an enemy. And finally, imperialism. As we already know, that countries are going around the world, the industrialized countries gobbling up the non-industrialized country, taking land, labor, and capital. And we know that the Berlin Conference, when they did the scramble for Africa, was supposed to prevent this kind of thing from happening. But everybody's kind of looking sideways at each other, going, "Uh-oh, these guys are getting big and powerful, and I need to get mine. So what's going to happen here?" And so eventually, you take land, labor, and capital to the point to where you're butting up against another imperial power. So there are two sides to the First World War. One is known as the Triple Alliance, and it contains four countries. Three are labeled here, and that is Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. The other one is the Ottoman Empire, and that is down here where it'll be modern day Turkey. The other side is known as the Triple Entente. Britain, France, and Russia are the primary parts of the Triple Entente. Now, understand that there are over 30 countries that actually participate in this war, but we're just going to concentrate mainly on the big guys. Some other countries we'll talk about near the end. And here's all the colonies that everybody has gobbled up from up into the beginning of the war in 1914. Obviously, the imperial powers have done pretty well for themselves, but they're starting to feel each other's breath on each other's neck. So the spark comes in a location called the Balkans. This contains places like Serbia, Austria, Hungary, Bulgaria, parts of Greece. It's always said that, like, if there was going to be a war someday, it was probably going to be in the Balkans. And there were three countries that were really looking at this area. Russia wants greater access to the Mediterranean Sea, so would love a port in the Balkans through the help of Serbia, who is also very ethnically similar. Germany wants a rail link all through here down to the Ottoman Empire, who was an ally. And the Hungarian Empire is actually the ones that are ruling the Serbians. And the Serbs actually kind of want it back. So in June of 1914, the second in command in the Austrian Hungarian Empire, the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, travels to Sarajevo in Bosnia to review the group of troops. The story is that Gavrilo Princip, a 19-year-old man and part of a nationalist group called the Black Hand that's pro-Serbian nationalism, takes out a gun and shoots the Archduke dead and his wife also in front of a deli in Sarajevo. Here is the Archduke and his wife, and there is young Mr. Princip. This starts, of course, a cascade of impacts due to the death of the Archduke. This is known as the Guns of August. Austria-Hungary issues what are called the July ultimatums. That is 10 demands that Serbia do if they don't want war. And of course, Serbia gives in to almost everything except for one, and Austria-Hungary says, fine, we're going to war. Russia, this is kind of like the dominoes falling here in World War One. Russia, who was a friend of Serbia, starts mobilizing its troops towards the border with uh, Austria-Hungary. Germany, who is looking at Russia do that, is a friend of Austria-Hungary, and so they say, "Okay, Russians, we got you. We're going to war with you to back up our brothers in Austria-Hungary." Germany, also realizing that one of Russia's friends is France on the other side of the country, then declares war on France. But to get to France, they actually have to invade Belgium. Are you getting this timeline? Britain is a friend of Belgium, and so Britain declares war on Germany for invading Belgium. The United States doesn't do anything. We're staying out of this for now. Later, we'll get in. Austria-Hungary then also declares war on Russia. Britain and France declare war on Austria-Hungary. And in the end, it's like everybody's at war with everybody else. Japan declares war on Germany on August 23rd. And that's important because Japan thinks it's going to get some territory out of this. That if whoever loses, if Germany loses, that maybe some stuff from Germany or the Ottoman Empire can go to Japan. So they're looking for their own little game here. All right. Couple of things. There are a couple of countries that actually have changes, and we don't hear about them much anymore. Italy actually backs off the beginning of the war, and then actually flips and joins the Allies a year later in 1915. And Britain basically says, "Hey, I'm going to give you parts of the Ottoman Empire and Austria-Hungary if you come fight for us." And Italy's like, oh, "Okay." They watched the tug of war for about a year, and then they said, "I'm going to join the Allies over here." Okay, so that's why, if you notice, Italy originally was part of that Central Powers, the Triple Alliance, but eventually they joined the other side. Russia in 1917 backs out because of the Russian Revolution. Basically, conditions get so bad in Russia, on top of the fact that they are some of the least developed industrialized countries. They have a huge wounded and killed, the highest of any country up until 1917. And so there's a revolt in Russia. Russia has to back out. They become the first communist government, and they eventually change their name to the Soviet Union, the USSR. Germany tries to do this very fast. They realize, we got France on, I got France to the left of me, Russia to the right. Here I am stuck in the middle with them both. So they do what's called the Schlieffen Plan, which is this quick strike plan. If I mobilize very fast and attack France super fast, then I can turn around. I've got that side secure. Then I can go fight Russia, who is probably going to have more people and therefore is going to be more of a problem. But Belgium is neutral, remember, and of course, when they go into Belgium, that means that Great Britain has to jump in. Again, this is called the Schlieffen Plan. What happens is the war gets bogged down. They didn't prepare very well in Germany. They did this willy-nilly. Belgium is, a mess. And basically, France sees this coming and starts to build what are known as trenches, big old grooves and cuts in the ground. What the war becomes is it becomes a trench warfare kind of situation. And World War One is then called what is known as a war of attrition. Traditionally, wars have these battles, and these battles have a winner and a loser, and you'll notice these things in history books. But this becomes less about battles and what's known as a war of attrition, which is basically who is going to wear down first and collapse. Because this is just going to take an enormous amount of resources, both land and labor and capital, to fight this war. And eventually, someone's just going to have to say, "I quit. I can't do this anymore." And the other side is looking at the other side and saying, who's going to be first to blink? Okay. So you have two fronts to this war. One is the Western Front, which is Germany versus France and Great Britain over here, where all the trenches are done, going from the Alps all the way to the English Channel. The Eastern Front is over here on the Russia side with Germany and Austria-Hungary. And remember, in 1917, eventually Russia will back off, and then that's going to be it. You'll have one front over here in the trench warfare. No man's land is the area between the trenches. Basically, the land is completely and totally pulverized by artillery. There's almost nothing alive on it. And to stick your head out above that trench is to probably have it shut off. So the old school way was to, of course, do things like charges with cavalry and troops, and you couldn't do that anymore because everyone had guns and everybody had new guns called machine guns. So this area was given the name of no man's land. You did not try to cross it because it got you killed. And this is why people wouldn't move for years because you can't gain any ground if every time you pop up over it, it gets you killed. Propaganda tried to make people join the military because people still were trying to do old school cavalry charges and all these things. It just became a meat grinder. And eventually, when propaganda was not influencing people's behavior and like, oh yes, come and fight, you'll be home by Christmas, eventually they have to do what's called conscription or the draft. And this is in the draft, you basically tell every able-bodied male, 18 to about 26, that you're going to go and fight for the country. And it wasn't until much later when the realization of how bad war actually was, because people did hear about the glory and the highlights of war, even though it was all garbage, but it did get people to join. If you were a colony in Africa or Asia, you didn't have a choice. You had brigades from India and parts of China and parts of Africa that all fought in the war for the colonial power. The reality, of course, of war was significantly worse. If you were going to go over the top of that trench, it often got you killed. And living in trenches, in trench warfare, was completely and totally miserable. It usually meant that you were camped in the mud and muck for very long amounts of time. There was rats, there was disease. It was just an awful, awful, awful place to be. One of the common things you got because you were basically standing, sitting, lying in water forever was trench foot, and where your feet were essentially waterlogged so much they were getting things were being amputated, and funguses were getting so awful it was malforming feet. It was just a terrible condition for a person to live. To deal with trench warfare, there started to be new inventions, things like flamethrowers and using barbed wire in mass amounts. Biplanes, which is your first airplanes, are used to scout and drop bombs. U-boats cut back on supplies from other countries or people trying to send troops. Machine gunners and chemical weapons and gas masks and tanks. And all these were attempts of technology to fight back against the ideas of trench warfare. Who's going to break the stalemate there? World War I also did some amazing things for battlefield medicine. The chances, as opposed to other times in history, of you surviving combat did go up, even though a lot of people died. And yeah, this new medicine and types of surgery, like blood transfusions and blood banks, yeah, a lot of people die, or a lot of people lived, but they also lived as wounded. And so things like the Purple Star or Purple Heart and like Gold Star families of people that survived combat or were wounded in combat. These things came out of the First World War. Their lives didn't end, but they were confronted with the reality of how horrible war was going forward. The war ends eventually, mainly because the United States gets involved and reinvigorates the war effort. They jump in 1970 for a variety of reasons you will learn in U.S. history, but they are the ones that swing the tide in favor of the Allies. The war ends on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918. Kaiser Wilhelm, the leader that brought Germany to war, goes through a small revolution against him back in Germany, and he leaves office on November 9th. He eventually is exiled and lives the rest of his life outside of Germany. The winners get together in France, and they sign what is known as the Treaty of Versailles. It is done by the Council of Four. This is France, Great Britain, Italy, and the United States. They essentially want to make post-World War I Europe's image in what they believe is right. None of the losers are allowed to be in on the talks at all. No Central Powers at all. Russia has become a communist country and is kind of like, you stay over there, you're weird and communist. And they are not a power of the talks. And so basically you have these four people that are dictating terms of the peace, and they are insanely hard on the Central Powers, especially Germany. They're going to make them pay for this really horrific war. To do that, there are several goals that this Council of Four does, and that's they want to make Germany feel awful. So they established what's called the War Guilt Clause. Germany is entirely to blame for the war. And to show that they are to blame, Germany is forced to demilitarize their entire country. So now your land, labor, and capital is not allowed to be militarized. You're not allowed to build a military. We're going to take that away from you. Decolonization starts in Germany. German colonies are given independence, or they are handed over to the Big Four, and they'll decide what's actually going to happen. Problem here is the Allies actually don't keep a lot of territorial promises and colonial promises made during the war to get Japan and Italy and Russia and China on their side. And this is going to set up some seeds. Japan's not going to be happy. Italy's not going to be happy. Russia's not going to be happy. And China is not going to be happy down the road. The effects of this war are pretty profound. Europe was pretty optimistic before World War I. Now Europe was destroyed, and basically an entire set of countries has been depopulated. Because Europe is so weak and destabilized, dictators come to power all over Europe. People like Benito Mussolini in Italy or Adolf Hitler in Russia. Countries are also so tired about war, they're just kind of letting people do what they want and then going in and isolating on themselves. This would include the United States. And so these dictators are allowed to come to power, and everybody's like, I'm done with war. I don't want to do it anymore. And the waiting is going to have a consequence. Africa and Asia begin decolonization. Colonies begin to rebel actively against their colonial powers, some of which are too weak to now keep them because the war has weakened them down. So a lot of places in Africa and Asia start to experience a taste of a little freedom. The Treaty of Versailles basically hurts many countries. Germany is insanely resentful. They go through a little bit of democracy, but eventually Adolf Hitler is going to take power. Italy and Japan ended up fighting for the Allies, but they were basically told, hey, thank you, now go away. And those are two powers that are going to look at the United States and Great Britain much differently, what leads to World War II. The United States comes out the best in World War I. They were also not in it that long, but they definitely come out the best. They were untouched because they're on the other side of the ocean. Their economy is roaring. The roaring 20s will happen. There's a little bit of an economic downturn right after the war, but then the roaring 20s happen, and everybody is partying and having a good time. And it officially is now a world power, not the world power. That will happen after World War II, but it is a world power. And of course, the Spanish flu starts in Europe after World War II or World War I, and ends up killing another 22 million people as a result. 32 countries fought in this war from all over India, various parts of the Middle East. You have the Ottoman Empire, Ottoman Turks also. The cost overall, however, is going to span generations. An entire generation of men in Europe just disappear. I mean, just the men are gone. And so you're going to have families just with no male influence at all. You're not going to have male suitors. The population has gone down. This is going to mean that sets up the rise for new male figures to take over, and strong men are going to be the ones. There are literally 4 empires that fall. Like the Ottoman Empire, gone. Austrian-Hungarian Empire, gone. But 9 new nations actually arise from this, and so we have just different countries that appear. Europe is now officially no longer the dominant force in global politics and wealth. And this goes back a long time, like before the Industrial Revolution, the Scientific Revolution, and the Renaissance, and the establishment of the Catholic Church. Europe has been the dominant place for global politics and wealth. That has now stopped, and now the United States and a little bit of a rise in Japan are the places where global politics and wealth are. The world turns isolationist. They just are going to let a lot of these dictators rise to power, and eventually the seeds of World War II have already been planted. Now there's no stopping it. It's going to happen because World War One, the end was not taken care of well. The U.S., by the way, will learn this after World War II and help out the rebuilding of Japan and Germany after World War II. So we did learn a lesson, but it's going to be a rough lesson to learn because World War II is going to be worse than World War One. 37 million deaths are caused either directly or indirectly because of the First World War. It is brutal. It is the U.S.'s first industrial war, and some things that you may know came out of that war. One is the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, which is in Washington, D.C. at Arlington National Cemetery, that represents the bodies of the fallen that cannot be identified. And there are people from different wars that are interned there. And then there is a very honorable ceremony. It's guarded every day of the week, 24 hours a day since 1937 by what are known as the Old Guard, the Sentinels of the United States Army. So that comes out of World War I. Veterans Day comes out of World War I here in the United States. And the idea of the poppy, sometimes you will see this attached to the military, the bloodshed that has been spilt by a country in defense of its nation. We know the destruction of no man's land, how much devastation there was. The first thing to actually come out of that the first thing that grows after all the devastation is poppies. And so that's why the poppy is kind of represented, not only in the United States, but also in Western countries as a sign of blood that has been shed for your country. And that is the First World War. It was the first industrial war. It was horrific, and it will set the seeds for another war that is World War II.